Chapter 3. The New Thought and the New Order. In the two preceding lectures, I have endeavored to reach some conception of what the all-originating Spirit is in itself, and of the relation of the individual to it. So far as we can form any conception of these things at all, we see that they are universal principles applicable to all nature, and, at a human level, applicable to all men. They are general laws, the recognition of which is an essential preliminary to any further advance, because progress is made not by setting aside the inherent laws of things, which is impossible, but by specializing it through presenting conditions, which will enable the same principle to act in a less limited manner. Having therefore got a general idea of these two ultimates, the universal and the individual, and their relation to one another, let us now consider the process of specialization. In what does the specialization of a natural law consist? It consists in making that law or principle produce an effect which it could not produce under the simply generic conditions spontaneously provided by nature. This selection of suitable conditions is the work of intelligence. It is a process of consciously arranging things in a new order, so as to produce a new result. The principle is never new, for principles are eternal and universal. But the knowledge that the same principle will produce new results when working under new conditions is the key to the unfoldment of infinite possibilities. What we have therefore to consider is the working of intelligence in providing specific conditions for the operation of universal principles, so as to bring about new results which will transcend our past experiences. The process does not consist in the introduction of new elements, but in making new combinations of elements which are always present. Just as our ancestors had no conception of carriages that could go without horse, and yet by a suitable combination of elements which were always in existence, such vehicles are common objects in our streets today. How then is the power of intelligence to be brought to bear upon the generic law of the relation between the individual and the universal, so as to specialize it into the production of greater results than those which we have hitherto obtained? All the practical attainments of science, which place the civilized world of today in advance of the times of King Alfred or Charlemagne, have been gained by a uniform method, and that a very simple one. It is by always inquiring what is the affirmative factor in any existing combination, and asking ourselves why, in that particular combination, it does not act beyond certain limits. What makes the thing a success, so far as it goes, and what prevents it going further? Then, by carefully considering the nature of the affirmative factor, we see what sort of conditions to provide to enable it to express itself more fully. This is the scientific method. It has proved itself true in respect of material things, and there is no reason why it should not be equally reliable in respect of spiritual things also. Taking this as our method, we ask, what is the affirmative factor in the whole creation, and in ourselves as included in the creation? And, as we found in the first lecture, this factor is spirit, that invisible power which concentrates the primordial ether into forms, and endows those forms with various modes of motion, from the simple mechanical motion of the planet up to the volitional motion in man. And since this is so, the primary affirmative factor can only be the feeling and the thoughts of the universal spirit. Now, by the hypothesis of the case, the universal spirit must be the pure essence of life, and therefore its feeling and thought can only be towards the continually increasing expression of the livingness which it is. And accordingly, the specialization, of which we are in search, must be along the line of affording it a center from which it may more perfectly realize this feeling and express this thought. In other words, the way to specialize the generic principle of spirit is by providing new mental conditions in consonance with its own original source. The scientific method of inquiry therefore brings us to the conclusion that the required conditions for translating the racial and generic operation of the spirit into a specialized, individual operation is a new way of thinking, mode of thought concurring with, and not in opposition to, the essential forward movement of the creative spirit itself. This implies an entire reversal of our old conceptions. Hitherto we have taken forms and conditions as the starting point of our thought, and inferred that they are the cause of mental states. Now we have learned that the true order of the creative process is exactly the reverse, and that thought and feeling are the causes, and forms and conditions the effects. When we have learned this lesson, we have grasped the foundation principle on which individual specialization of the generic law of the creative process becomes a practical possibility. New thought, then, is not the name of a particular sect, but is the essential factor by our own future development is to be carried on, and its essence consists in seeing the relation of things in a new order. Hitherto we have inverted the true order of cause and effect. Now, by carefully considering the real nature of the principle of causation in itself, causa causans, as distinguished from cause causata, we return to the true order and adopt a new method of thinking in accordance with it. In themselves, this order and this method of thinking are not new. They are older than the foundation of the world, for they are those of the creative spirit itself, and all through the ages this teaching has been handed down under various forms, the true meaning of which has been perceived only by a few in each generation. But as the light breaks in upon any individual in its new light to him, and so to each one in succession, it becomes the new thought. And when anyone reaches it, he finds himself in a new order. He continues indeed to be included in the universal order of the cosmos, but in a perfectly different way to what he had previously supposed. For, from this new standpoint, he finds that he is included not so much as a part of the general effect, but as a part of the general cause. And when he perceives this, he then sees that the method of his further advance must be by letting the general cause flow more and more freely into his own specific center, and he therefore seeks to provide thought conditions which will enable him to do so. Then, still employing the scientific method of following up the affirmative factor, he realizes that this universal causative power, by whatever name he may call it, manifests as supreme intelligence in the adaptation of means to an end. It does so in the mechanism of the planet, in the production of supply for the support of physical life, and in the maintenance of the race as a whole. True, the investigator is met at every turn with individual failure, but his answer to this is that there is no cosmic failure, and that the apparent individual failure is itself a part of the cosmic process, and will diminish in proportion as the individual attains to the recognition of the moving principle of that process, and provides the necessary conditions to enable it to take a new starting point in his own individuality. Now, one of these conditions is to recognize it as intelligence, and to remember that when working through our own mentality, it in no way changes its essential nature, just as electricity loses none of its essential qualities in passing through the special apparatus which enables it to manifest as light. When we see this, our line of thought will run something as follows. My mind is a center of divine operation. The divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression, and this means the new production of something beyond what has gone before, something entirely new, not included in past experience, though proceeding out of it by an orderly sequence of growth. Therefore, since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, it must operate in the same manner in me. Consequently, in my own special world, of which I am the center, it will move forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have gone before. This is a legitimate line of argument from the premise established in the recognition of the relation between the individual and the universal mind. And it results in our looking to the divine mind, not only as creative, but also as directive. That is, as determining the actual form which the conditions for the manifestation will take in our own particular world, as well as supplying the energy for their production. We miss the point of the relation between the individual and the universal if we do not see that the originating spirit is a forming power. It is the forming power throughout nature, and if we would specialize in it, we must learn to trust its formative quality when operating from its new starting point in ourselves. But the question naturally arises, if this is so, what part is taken by the individual? Our part is to provide a concrete center round which the divine energies can play. In the generic order of being, we exercise upon it a force of attraction in accordance with the innate pattern of our particular individuality. And as we begin to realize the law of this relation, we, in our turn, are attracted towards the divine along the lines of least resistance. That is on these lines which are most natural to our special bent of mind. In this way, we throw out certain aspirations with the result that we intensify our attraction of the divine force in a certain specific manner. And they then begin to act both through us and around us in accordance with our aspirations. This is the rationale of the reciprocal action between the universal mind and the individual mind. And this shows us that our desires should not be directed so much to the acquisition of particular things as to the reproduction in ourselves of particular phases of the Spirit's activity. And this, being its own very nature creative, is bound to externalize as corresponding things and circumstances. Then, when these external facts appear in the circle of our objective life, we must work upon them from the objective standpoint. This is where many fall short of completed work. They realize the subjective or creative process, but do not see that it must be followed by an objective or constructive process. And consequently, they are unpractical dreamers and never reach the stage of completed work. The creative process brings the materials and conditions for the work to our hands. Then we must make use of them with diligence and common sense. God will provide the food, but He will not cook the dinner. This then is the part taken by the individual, and it is thus that he becomes a distributing force of the divine energy. Neither on the one hand trying to lead it like a blind force, nor on the other being himself under a blind, unreasoning impulsion from it. He receives guidance because he seeks guidance, and he both seeks and receives according to the law which he is able to recognize, so that he no more sacrifices his liberty or dwarfs his powers than does an engineer who submits to the generic laws of electricity in order to apply them to some specific purpose. The more intimate his knowledge of this law of reciprocity becomes, the more he finds that it leads on to liberty, on the same principle by which we find in physical science that nature obeys us precisely in the same degree to which we first obey nature. As the esoteric maxim has it, what is a truth on one plane is a truth on all. But the key to this enfranchisement of body, mind, and circumstance is in the new thought which becomes creative of new conditions, because it realizes the true order of the creative process. Therefore, it is that, if we would bring a new order of life, light, and liberty into our lives, we must commence by bringing a new order into our thought, and find in ourselves the starting point of a new creative series, not by the force of personal will, but by union with the divine Spirit, which in the expression of its inherent love and beauty makes all things new. End of chapter.